For a southern resident killer whale, there is nothing more important than the birth of a new calf. The southern residents live in the Pacific Northwest, primarily around Washington and British Columbia. Their primary food source, Chinook salmon, has been in sharp decline due to overfishing and habitat destruction. There is more pollution in their waters, more boat traffic, more noise, more stress, all of which has led to more miscarriages. Studies show that up to 75% of pregnancies in this population fail. This pod of killer whales, you might also know them as orcas, they can't afford to keep losing pregnancies. There are only 73 southern resident orcas left. They are a closed population. They only breed within their own group, meaning you can't just import an orca from Norway or Alaska for breeding. That's why it was so thrilling when 20-year-old Tahlequah, scientific name J35, was about to give birth. The calf had gestated inside Tahlequah for 17 months. And after Tahlequah's daughter was born, she was a tiny replica of her mother. Well, only tiny when compared to her mother. Orca infants are 8 feet long and over 300 pounds. Immediately after the calf's birth, the mother and child were spotted swimming together, but the joy was short-lived. The baby would live less than an hour. After the death, the lifeless body of Tahlequah's calf would sink beneath the water. Over and over again, Tahlequah would dive to retrieve her baby, pushing it back to the surface. She nudged it along with her nose and gripped it with her mouth. Tahlequah seemed dedicated to the project of staying with her calf, and her pod never left her. In fact, they seemed to support her. Orcas live in pods known as matrilines. These pods are traced through the females, several generations of whales that stay together for life. Males in the group may stray to mate with other females, but they always return to their matrilines, their mother. A resident of San Juan Island reported seeing Tahlequah at sunset with her dead calf and a group of 6 other female whales. The person described what they witnessed as the pod gathered at the mouth of the cove in a close, tight-knit circle, staying at the surface in a harmonious circular motion for nearly 2 hours. As the light dimmed, I was able to watch them continue what seemed to be a ritual or ceremony. They stayed directly centered in the moonbeam, even as it moved. Days turned into weeks, and still Tahlequah would not give up her calf. Her little body began to decompose. Her skin sloughed off, the soft tissue, especially around the mouth and fins, broke down. The gradual disintegration made it harder for Tahlequah to carry the body intact. But Tahlequah persisted, readjusting her small body when it slipped away, lifting it back onto her head. For the first week she carried her calf, Tahlequah hadn't been eating. At last, she allowed other members of the pod to hold and float the calf for her while she took short rests. Tahlequah carried the small body for 17 days, traveling over 1,000 miles. People from all around the world followed her journey. They seemed to relate to it. An orca bearing her daughter over such a distance was a visual representation of a sadness that we all carry after a tragic death. This really shocked some people, but this behavior is not unique to killer whales. It's seen in many ocean mammals. Orisso's dolphin calf was carried so long by its mother that by the time a human recorded the behavior, the calf was in such an advanced state of decay that it was missing 90% of its skin. When an Indo-Pacific bottlenose dolphin calf died, biologists tied a rope around the calf's fluke to drag it to shore for burial. An adult female dolphin, presumed to be its mother, followed alongside the calf and then waited at the shoreline for days. There's a temptation to anthropomorphize, to attribute human characteristics and rituals and grief to these animals. Like, whales and dolphins, they are just like us. Then there's the opposite extreme, which would claim that animals are incapable of feeling that kind of grief, that they just do it out of instinct. There's no real feeling there. I would argue something else, potentially controversial, which is that it is actually humans who are not capable of grasping what these animals feel. Killer whales are brilliant creatures with large brains, high levels of processing and problem solving, language, and deep emotional lives. The brains of killer whales have enlarged limbic lobes, the area that humans would use for emotions and the formation of memories. Their sense of self is not individualized, but intimately intertwined with the other members of their group. It is likely that the social bonds and emotional lives of killer whales are more rich and more complex than those of humans. This leads to the stunning theory that the death of a baby, the worst thing imaginable to a human parent and family, may be devastating for a killer whale in ways we can't even understand, especially since the previous years had been horrible for Tahlequah's pod. 2 years prior, in January of 2016, Tahlequah's sister, known as Polaris, was looking thin and sluggish, a researcher describing her as super gaunt. Polaris was the darling of the J-pod, easily identifiable by the nick in her dorsal fin, but whale lovers had to watch helplessly as Polaris continued to languish. By mid-October, Polaris was dead, leaving behind her pod and her young son around 10 months old, a little whale called Dipper. The other orcas in Polaris's immediate family, including Tahlequah, tried desperately to save Dipper. But without his mother's milk, at his age, survival was all but impossible. Tahlequah and Polaris's other daughter, Star, would bring salmon to Dipper and carry him to the surface of the water. His baby fin was covered in tooth rakes from his pod attempting to hoist him up for air. Sadly, Dipper needed milk, not salmon, and despite the best efforts, the calf soon died of malnutrition. For those of you who haven't been long-time orca-pilled, like me, I'm the highest level of orca-pilled. Even for you, the last few years have been a boon to understanding just how incredible these orcas are. Mostly thanks to the Iberian subpopulation of orcas, who have sunk 5 ships in southwest Europe and damaged hundreds of sailboats. Some scientists say that this recent behavior might be attributed to one matriarch orca named White Gladys. White Gladys was pregnant when this all started, and in her pain began ramming boats and ripping off their rudders. White Gladys's orca girl gang may have playfully copied Gladys, probably passed this on to one another, and discovered ripping rudders off boats is just fun. People claim to have witnessed orcas passing on this very specific set of skills to each other. It has become an inexplicable orca trend, like planking. Another way we anthropomorphize killer whales is to say that this behavior is them taking revenge on humans for the destruction of the ocean. But if orcas really wanted revenge, they would just kill humans. Orcas are apex predators. Have you ever seen them with a great white shark or a seal or another massive whale? But an orca has never killed a human in the wild. The only time orcas have physically attacked or killed human beings is when they were held in captivity, under arguably, that's me, I'm making the argument, extreme torture or sensory deprivation. Back to our southern resident killer whales. We know that orcas can learn things, develop traits that, if they were human, and again, they are not, we would call rituals or culture. It is possible that Tahlequah had developed a method of ritual grief, something her pod now does when calves die. Because just this year, it happened again. In early January, Tahlequah was spotted carrying the body of yet another female calf, J61. Born at the end of December, J61 only lived for about a week. Repeating her heartbreaking behavior from 2018, Tahlequah carried J61 on her head, never allowing her body to sink, for over 2 weeks. I think Tahlequah's story, what she did after the death of her 2 calves, goes beyond just the relatable grief of being a mother losing a child. Something that we tend to do, especially in Western culture, is to put up boundaries and guardrails around our grief. In the modern funeral system, when a child dies, there is a belief that the kind thing to do is to relieve the parents of the burden of having to take care of the body of the child. The kind thing to do is to immediately take the child to a funeral home, embalm the body, present it back to the parents in a pink casket on a pedestal at a safe distance. But mothers, especially, have always been the ones to push back on this. They do not see their child as a burden. There's another story of a mother who lost a child that has always stayed with me. Sayomi Shito's daughter Chisato was at school on the day of the devastating 2011 earthquake in Japan. The earthquake was followed by the primeval tsunami that ripped through the town and left it stripped and blighted. When Sayomi was at last told that 11-year-old Chisato had been found, the mother assumed that meant she had been found alive. She prepared food and clothes for her poor, cold, scared girl. As she pulled up at the local high school, which was being used as a temporary morgue, she was told not to get out of the car. She ignored this and ran inside, where she was greeted by small, amorphous shapes laid out on tarps and covered in blankets. Sayomi described the moment she first saw her daughter to journalist Richard Lloyd Perry. Chisato was there. She was covered in mud. She was naked. I held her and lifted her up and called her name over and over, but she didn't answer. I rubbed the mud from her cheeks and wiped it out of her mouth. I had nothing else, so I used my clothes to wipe off the mud. Her eyes were half open. That was the way she used to sleep. But there was muck in her eyes, and there were no towels and no water. So I licked Chisato's eyes with my tongue to wash off the muck. But I couldn't get them clean, and the muck kept coming out. That image has haunted me since the first time I read it. The image of a mother licking the eyeballs of her dead child. And it haunts me, but it doesn't surprise me. The same way that carrying your dead child for over 1,000 miles doesn't surprise me. There is a raw, visceral grief that comes with the death of a child. They want more time to care, more time to interact, more time to accept this terrible reality, more time to engage in the role of mother. They want to stay with their baby, as Tahlequah did, as Sayomi Shito did. Now, this diatribe is coming from someone who was once in the New York Times with the headline, "Something I'm always trying to get you to do is hang out with dead bodies." So I am perhaps biased. But after a death, don't give up your child if you don't want to. Don't give them up until you're ready. That could be 2 hours, that could be 2 days. Tahlequah is not just a sad story. She's an example of what is possible. I'll leave you with a ray of hope and a ray of warning. Is that a thing? Our ray of hope is that J62, a seemingly healthy baby female orca, was born January 1st of this year. Tahlequah was seen traveling with both J62 and the body of her daughter, J61, but she is now no longer carrying J61. J62 has been seen bouncing along, and that little rascal is in our thoughts. Come on, J62, come on. The warning is that researchers at the Center for Whale Research have found that a southern resident female has the ability to produce a baby every 3 years. And it had been happening on average every 5 years. But now, many of the southern resident females have no babies at all. If these pregnancies continue to fail, or they wait too long to successfully mate, the group will become too old, and they will have to wait to die. There is a need to make changes, especially in salmon policy. Donate to killer whale groups like the Center for Whale Research, where researchers and volunteers lay all this out in more detail. They also document each and every member of the southern resident population. I get emails from them about these individual orcas, like parents get updates and photos from their child's nursery school about them eating carrots and farting. Like, they're very detailed. As always, thank you for your support on Patreon. Our last 2 videos have been demonetized. That's a streak. Let's go. That is frustrating, but fine because of you all and your generosity. So thank you.
Come on, J62. Let's go, little sweetie. You got this.